The fires still burn beneath America's ashiest podcast, The Pod People. I'm the demon, Matisse Van Rossum.
I'm the Gimp Cop, Ben Sheets.
Hi, and I'm Cleveland Mosier, and I just got a letter the other day from someone named Mary. Y'all know anything about that?
Not me. I wouldn't know anything around these parts.
You get letters?
What year is it, even?
Well, what year is it is a great question, because this week it's 2006, and we're talking about Cleveland's choice, the film Silent Hill, based on the Japanese game series by Konami, directed by Christoph Gans, and starring Radha Mitchell, Laurie Holden, Sean Bean, Deborah Kara Unger, and Jodelle Furland. Cleveland, this was your choice.
It was.
Was it everything you remembered and so much more?
No. No, it was not. Both yes and no, if we're being completely honest. There was a lot that held up, and there was a lot that did not, that I was already aware of. I'd watched this film relatively recently, the past 2 or so years. At some point, I'm sure I rewatched it. I'd seen it a good number of times. But I picked it for several reasons. First, I am a huge fan of the games, the franchise in general, but primarily Silent Hill 2. That's my favorite. It's one of my favorite games of all time. For all the reasons it's the favorite game of all time for many critics in the games industry. And the other more relevant reason I picked it now is because Dead by Daylight, a different game franchise, just released a big DLC patch where you can play as Pyramid Head and Cheryl. It's extremely fun, and I've been having a blast with it. Not a sponsor, but it's the closest
But if
we're
Dead
gonna.
by Daylight wants to give us money,
Hey, yeah, but yeah, shout out to Dead by Daylight, great game, having a blast. They're also celebrating their fourth year anniversary.
Why is the sponsor shelf glowing?
Yeah,
and shaking too.
In anger? I don't know, but anyway. It's the closest we're likely going to get to an actual Silent Hill game anytime soon. I hope I'm wrong, with a big asterisk on that. But it's a pretty large franchise. I forget how many games there have been exactly, but there's been one on the Wii U. There's been one on all sorts of different platforms.
When did
and
the
such.
first one come out? Like 97, 98, something like that?
Thereabouts, yeah. I told myself I'd do a whole bunch of research on the games again and kind of re-jog my memories. It's been a long time since I've looked into all of it, and I didn't. So you're going to get some nebulous recollections from me throughout the podcast.
Well, all I know is that Konami still holds the license, and they seem pretty dedicated these days to only making pachinko machines and slot machines.
Hit the lever.
So yeah, there have been a lot of Silent Hill slot machines. If you go to like casinos in Japan and stuff,
My soul hurts.
You can Pyramid Head can slash up some money for you. I don't fucking know.
Yeah, I don't know how those things work, and I don't care to know.
Well, how did this movie scratch that Silent Hill itch for you? I have seen this movie before too, several times. Actually, the first time I watched it was with you, Cleveland, when we were in high school. You introduced it to me. It's probably somewhere around 2009, 2010. Back then, I loved it.
I haven't seen this movie before. I was surprised because I'm a big fan of the games, much like you, Cleve. Silent Hill 2 in particular is a real standout.
Honestly, Ben, I think your perspective is probably the one that, as a listener, I'd be most interested in hearing because you're a fan of the games, but you'd never seen the film. So why don't you just, go off for a little bit and tell us about that?
Sure. So it's interesting because with video game movies in general, the quality expectation is very low. There's usually a lot lost in translation, especially considering games are a medium where you have active agency, whereas with movies, you're a very passive observer.
And also just like the time difference too. Most video games the story is told over the course of anywhere from like 5 to these days like 40 hours, and in a movie, if you're trying to adapt a video game, you have to cram it all into an hour and a half, 2 hours long. And I think that really hurts the translation a lot. Like, video game movies are notoriously bad, and this is the first one we've talked about on the podcast, but I've seen a handful that have been really terrible.
Rough ones.
I'm sure in an alternate reality, we covered the version of the Sonic film where they didn't fix Sonic.
Right.
I'm sure there's an alternate reality where we picked that for a podcast episode.
I feel like at some point we'll inevitably have to cover Resident Evil, but
yeah, at some point. I wouldn't mind seeing it again, just the first one, just to see. But anyway, enough about that.
Continue.
But yeah, I think Silent Hill is an interesting one because I feel like a lot of what makes those games good are inherent to the medium of video games, in that like it's a lot of running around corridors and a lot of walking around and running away from enemies. So I was a little worried about how this film would hold up, and I think honestly it might be the best video game movie I've seen. You know, it's in close contentions with Super Mario Brothers, obviously. But I think it does a really fantastic job capturing the spirit of the Silent Hill games, both good and bad. The games are very, notorious for their stilted dialogue, especially their, English dialogue, considering it's a Japanese company. And this movie definitely has some stilted dialogue.
Boy, howdy, does it.
But I think it also captures, some of those unsettling sequences. You get a lot of weird overhead camera movement of going through spaces. The production design is pretty good. And even the creatures I thought were pretty good. I think the CG is definitely dated.
In many circumstances, there were a few where I thought it held up all right. It's kind of all over the place. There are a few like
tell
external.
where they put their money.
Yeah, there are a few like external shots where the environment is changing and it looks like a video game. It's a little bit too smooth and sort of rough, but some of the creatures, they do a decent job, like the CG creatures, they do a decent job of like keeping the camera far enough away, keeping the cuts short enough that even now, like the patient demon, I think didn't look terrible.
You know what?
I thought it looked all right still.
You know what's bad about the CG? I was trying to put my finger on it for a lot of the movie, and I finally figured it out in the scene where Pyramid Head is chasing them through the school with all the bugs, because the bugs look really fucking bad. It's like their textures are fine, the lighting is inconsistent.
Right.
Like which is like those two things go really hand in hand in making like good CG. Like you want to have good textures, believable textures, and consistent lighting, and the lighting on the CG does not look like the same light sources as everything else.
And what I'll give props to is I will give props to the texture though, because like that era of CG full of way too smooth stuff.
For sure.
Like the film never, I think, had that problem where things looked too smooth. But yeah, they did have inconsistent lighting. You're very right about that. I'm glad you brought it up that way. But when it comes to the practicals, holy shit, one of my favorite films for that. Like, one of my favorite films for practical effects. I adore a lot of the features in this film. The behind the scenes are well worth watching. I think there's some super cool, like, insights. There are shots where they actually, like, pulled walls out of the way to pivot the camera around and then reclosed it again, and all kinds of neat tricks.
Filmmaking stuff.
Yeah, it's fun. And
stuff that they do when they make movies.
Yeah, I know, but it's fun. Like the dance team for the nurses, and we can dig into that more.
Some of the camera work is especially necessary for, the series, because a lot of the camera work in the games is so notoriously off-kilter and meant to disorient you. One thing that I kept thinking throughout the movie is I was expecting like a very normified, a normie-centric take on Silent Hill.
No, you get the opposite.
With this, it's a mainstream video game movie, so I was expecting something very safe. And I think it was the scene where Pyramid Head rips all of the skin off of a girl
Yeah.
and throws it at a church door, where it just really clicked that, oh, yep, this is not your bog standard normie horror movie.
That's what I appreciate about this movie, is that it does take some risks. This is probably the least I've enjoyed it out of any times I've watched it.
Oh, same.
It is aging like cheese for me, or not like cheese, like fucking milk. But it is. I definitely do appreciate the non-norminess of it, as you said. Apparently, Christoph Gans got the rights from Konami because he basically sent them an audition video being like, I love Silent Hill. It's like my favorite game franchise. I want to make a movie. And he did some super low budget, proof of concept scenes that he just put music from the games under, sent that to Konami, and they're like, okay, yeah, we'll license this to you to make a movie. So, I mean, at least you can say that, unlike with somebody maybe like Uwe Boll, who has directed a lot of video game movies, that this movie was at least made by a true fan of the franchise. Just not a particularly good filmmaker, I don't think.
Yeah, it's so funny. This film most certainly does not have the problem of being a over executivified film. Fuck, that sounded terrible. But it didn't have the problem of too much board oversight or becoming a camel. It's clearly a love letter to the games, almost to its disservice at certain times. For as much as it cared about the games, I think it did still miss some of the points. And a big one is the dialogue. But before I dig into that, I do think it'd be good for our listeners who aren't familiar with Silent Hill to sort of dig into what it is, what the general premise of Silent Hill is. Silent Hill is a coal mining town in, I believe, West Virginia. And
well, that's where it is in the movie. I don't know if that's where it is in the
games as well, I believe. And it's a coal mine. It was an abandoned coal mining town in West Virginia that saw a number of coal fires underground, and the town had to be evacuated, and there were many deaths. And each of the games take place from a different character's perspective, as they have to return to Silent Hill for some sort of reason. And it's, spoiler alert, it's slowly revealed to you over the course of the game via context clues that your character has entered a sort of purgatory. Silent Hill has sort of two living states that it's in, this town. It has a very quiet, passive, misty atmosphere that occasionally descends into a more fiery hell. As the walls sort of rust over and the monsters appear.
And the monsters you see are actually projections.
Yes.
Of the characters' guilt and fears, which I think is one of the coolest aspects of Silent Hill.
Oh, I fully agree. And it leads to some incredible Freudian designs with these creatures. Each game has such a unique flavor of its own because of the monsters that come out of that character's psyche that you have to fend off. And for instance, in the second game, James's character, your quote protagonist, is sort of revealed to be horrible, misogynistic, and I believe abusive to his wife.
Well,
we learn.
He leaves his wife who has cancer.
Yeah, we see that represented in the form of Pyramid Head, who is this hyper masculinized figure. He's dragging this giant phallic knife around with him. He's all ripped. And muscular, and he's this butcher character.
Well, even more so than that, in Silent Hill 2, we get mannequins where they're only from the waist down, and it's just kind of flipped. So, where their
it's two sets of legs.
Yeah, body would be, it's just more legs.
Yeah.
And they kind of writhe around, and that's, obviously projecting.
And in the hospital, they're the sexualized, horrifying nurses that.
Yeah, his guilt
around.
about, leaving his wife who has cancer with the nurses. That's very, very clear connection between the two. And the mannequins, his view on sexuality in general.
So it's a fascinating dive into psychosis and approaching it from a very similar perspective as something like Jacob's Ladder. You know, it's this descent into hell. It's seen as a literal descent as you travel deeper into this town that becomes something more, and it becomes your own sort of like afterlife and torment. And I love that idea. I love that premise, and I think one of the coolest things about it is that it was created by an Eastern team. The Eastern perspective looking at like classic America gives it this slightly off, almost alien perspective, you know, because we're seeing like an interpretation of the American that isn't American per se. In the same way,
I don't know, man. Have you ever been to West Virginia?
So I haven't been to West Virginia, but I have actually been to the town that Silent Hill was based off of.
The movie Silent Hill was based off of.
The games as well.
I was researching it this morning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Centralia, Pennsylvania, like the coal fires burning under the city is something that was very specific to like
The film.
the movie adaptation.
Oh, my
that's what like inspired Christoph Gans. He's like, oh yeah, that's a really cool take for Silent Hill.
Mm-hmm.
I have never played a Silent Hill, so all of my knowledge about this franchise comes from osmosis through my friends and from this movie.
But yeah, no, I'm such a big nerd of the franchise that I did actually go on a pilgrimage with several other friends up to Centralia, Pennsylvania, where we brought gas masks and thermal detectors, and we went into the town and sort of looked around and saw like this actual real life abandoned coal mining town where the fires were still burning beneath. And it's crazy. You walk around and you just see the smoke rising up from the fucking ground. The interstate is abandoned there. They had to cut it off. And so we went to the section that was cut off, and there's just this huge crack running down it. And there's all sorts of like cool graffiti, and among which there's someone like who spray painted like "Damn it, James" and a few other fun things. But it's a really fascinating place, and there's I believe there's been concern that the fires will spread to Ashland, the nearby town, and that there's enough fuel there for it to burn for something like 1,000 years or something ridiculous.
Silent Hill 2.
Well, more on that later, but I think that pretty well sums up the games and the franchise as a whole. And there have been a lot of cool mechanics involved with that throughout. I think the Wii version or one of the games like had you sitting down with a psychologist, and you could check off things that scared you, that gave you fear, and they would take form in the game in some capacity. I never played that one, but I thought that idea was fascinating. The hallmarks of the games have always been, as Ben brought up earlier, stilted dialogue. And atmosphere. And I wanted to talk about how and why the stilted dialogue is successful in the games, or at least the early games, and in particular Silent Hill 2 for me, in that when characters spoke with each other, it felt off, and it felt by design. When James is talking to someone else, he takes a lot of pauses and acts almost like someone with dementia who's sort of lost and forgotten what room they're in. I'm looking for someone named Mary. And when you have characters that talk to each other and they sound so distant and far away and like they're almost having these conversations with themselves, it feels like two ghosts interacting with each other. It feels like something out of purgatory. It feels like a slightly wrong reimagining of the town you grew up in. And I love that. I think that the dialogue in the film is stilted for very different reasons.
Interesting. I think it mostly works in the same respects. I think there are some aspects where it is a little groan-worthy, but there's also aspects that I feel like are almost Giallo-esque.
Yes.
In that, like, it is very stilted, but it's in a movie that is very style over substance anyways, that I don't mind it as much. Mm-hmm. Particularly a lot of the church stuff.
Oh my god, that shit sucks,
it's
man.
painful.
I think the dialogue is bad, but the visuals are fun enough to get me through it for the most part.
I kind of disagree with you on the style over substance thing. I think that the style is successful and the substance is not, but I think this movie has a lot of quote unquote substance, or it is trying to be substantive. I think I would consider it bloated in that regard
Yes,
too.
almost too substantial.
Yeah, like there's too much fucking plot. There's too many twists and turns. There's too many characters. I haven't played the games, but the impression that I've always gotten is that so much of it is like you walking around this place alone, and you encounter people every now and then. And like by the end of this movie, by like even fucking halfway through the movie, there's just all of these characters all over the place.
Yeah.
And I feel like that deflates so much of the atmosphere that makes like the early parts of the movie good when our main character Rose,
Yes.
she's Rose and the little girl is Sharon.
More on that.
When she first gets to Silent Hill, that stuff is the best in the movie, I think, where she's like exploring the town and like sort of figuring out its rules and stuff like that. Then you introduce the bondage cop and things start getting worse, and then you introduce the church cult and things start getting worse,
Way worse.
and then you like introduce the demon, the like evil little girl character, and it's just
And the detective and
oh my
the,
God.
you know, like there's so much.
Yeah.
And earlier I said the film, while it is so true to the franchise and it cares, you can tell like the makers of the film like really gave a shit and studied the games and wanted to write this as make this as a love letter to them. They missed some crucial factors, and this is by far, I think, the most crucial. All of the stuff we were talking about when it comes to the psychology of of the characters, like, oh, the monsters represent this person's psychosis and this and this, or that Silent Hill acts as a purgatory and it's like they're descending to hell. None of that is ever said in like the good games. None of that is ever mentioned. That is all by context. That's why it works. You feel like you're caught up in this strange environment and you don't understand what is going on. And it is that loneliness, that isolation, and that alien concept that makes you feel like you've entered this strange and horrifying purgatory where you're forced to introspect, you know, via like these horrors. And the film cannot stop. It cannot help itself from constantly telling you what is going on. It feels this deep need to like regularly
Explain everything.
drop exposition
Yeah, I
on
agree.
you. And it is so in contrast to the games. You can get from the beginning to the end and not understand what Silent Hill is. You can have certain things explained to you. You know, like this hell was brought up because cult did thing, or these ghosts are here because this. But what Silent Hill itself is rarely said. And if it is, it's said at the very end. You know, but like the explanations of like, for instance, like you were getting into the coal fires burning underground and all that, that's brought up to us very early on in the film. You don't get that in the games. You never get that in Silent Hill 2, for instance.
I think that kind of context is fine for like why the town is abandoned.
Yeah, because I
but-
think that's pretty much added with the movie.
Like,
You know,
yeah.
it's not explicit in the games.
I think-
Exactly.
think
And I think it's
that's-
better because it's not explicit.
I think that's fine. Where I start to have a problem with it is like, man, the whole last third of this movie's so fucking long. It's
True,
2 hours.
slog.
It's 2 hours and 5 minutes. Yeah, it is. It's a slog, and like the whole last 45 minutes just has so much fucking exposition and so much like harebrained dumb ideas about like why the town is like haunted and shit in the way that it is, and that shit feels like studio interference to me in a lot of ways. I did read an interesting fact this morning that apparently in the original script there were no male characters, it was all female characters, and when they gave the script to the studio, they sent it back and said, there's no men in here. So they rolled in Sean Bean's character and the detective,
That's really
who are
funny
my two
because
least favorite characters in the movie.
that the whole Sean Bean subplot really feels unnecessary.
muddies the shit out of it,
Yeah,
too.
and well,
when you
it
bring in
literally
Detective Gucci.
it literally just adds exposition. At
Yeah.
one point, he goes to what we like to call the book expository.
Yeah, it was a fucking like archive building, and outside there's a neon sign that says exposition. Like, I could not fucking believe that like it's literally just the exposition building. There's so much of that in this movie.
That's
too.
the thing. I want to push back a little bit on some of the stuff earlier, because I think especially like Silent Hill 1 gets pretty convoluted as a game. But the thing is, I have a problem with it in the game too. Like, it gets overly complicated in the game to its detriment. Whereas I think, like, for example, with Silent Hill 2, I think they remedy a lot of those problems with some of the more explicit things with the games. They do it in a really interesting or novel way, rather than just straight out being like, this is what happens. And, you know, like, I think the detective, Sean Bean, all of that subplot is so
sucks, man.
You know, indicative of how they're trying to be too direct in explaining. I also felt like the whole burnt kid stuff felt a little tacked on at the end.
Well, let's describe the plot in broad strokes before we start getting into specifics.
Sure.
So we have our parents, Rose and Christopher, and their adopted daughter Sharon, who sleepwalks and has night terrors and screams out the name Silent Hill in her sleep. So Rose, thinking that maybe it'll fix her, decides to find out what is Silent Hill. Let's go there. She goes there and is like sucked into this purgatory and has to like find her daughter and figure out what's going on here. And there's a cult, and there's this other woman who has a daughter who looks exactly like Sharon, who we see all over the place. And it's like, ooh, what's going on here? So like that is like the central conceit. They kind of stick to the tradition of the games as like somebody is drawn to Silent Hill seeking something. Okay, cool, fine, whatever. But then also you've got fucking Sean Bean, who goes after her because he thinks that that she's crazy and like they need to put Sharon in the hospital. So he has his own whole investigation into Silent Hill, but he's not in like the purgatory version. So everywhere he's looking, it's like he feels her because she's close by in like the spooky version of Silent Hill, but they can't connect. And that shit is so boring. I hate it. And I hate Detective Gucci.
He's the worst detective.
He's, first of all, a terrible detective, and also shit just gets outright confusing with him at the end when it's revealed that, like, he and the other people who live around Silent Hill, like, know that it's a hell world and that they're trying to keep people out. And we see at the end where he's the one who found like the burned little girl, Alessa, who looks like Sharon. But that was 30 fucking years ago, and he looks the same in present day. He's the same age.
And there are so many like
is he supposed
weird.
to be a ghost or
We
something?
should say
Like,
Alessa does look like the girl, but she also looks like a fucking pretzel bun after she's burnt.
oh yeah,
That makeup is it's
Weird.
bizarre.
it looks good. It looks fine from a distance, but they do some close-ups on her, on like burnt Alessa's face, and it
looks rough.
It doesn't look spooky.
It looks really derpy.
Yeah, it doesn't look scary. Which, and considering the subject matter, like, I think that's kind of hard to fuck up. A child who has been burned is horrifying and terrible, and you've already got me. Come on. But no, there are some really
Yeah, that's one of
fucked
those
up,
things
fucking
where like
weird
less
motives.
is more. The less you show, the better.
The Alessa is more. But
That just took 5 years off my life.
But no, there are some really fucking weird motives in this movie. I think one of the weirdest is Bondage Cop early on. Oh, by the way, we're calling her Bondage Cop because the police officer in this film, she looks more like a dominatrix themed police officer than an actual
She's
police
wearing
officer.
leather pants.
Her costume is way too, like
Very leathery.
sexually minded. Like
Yeah.
it's odd. It's very gazy.
She's played by Laurie Holden, who some might know as Andrea from The Walking Dead. it.
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Our first interaction with her is Rose and Sharon stop at a gas station. She goes in. Rose goes inside. Sharon, the child, is in the car. The police officer comes by, looks in the car, says, "You doing okay, sweetie?" And the girl says, "Don't talk to strangers," and rolls up the window.
Yeah.
She says, "Good girl." So we have an interaction between the police officer and the girl. She knows she exists. And she clearly also cares about the kid. We also get exposition later on revealing that she like went down a well or something for a kid or whatever.
Some psycho threw a kid down a mine shaft
Yeah.
several years before, and so she went down in the mine shaft to get the kid and was stuck down there for like 3 days or something like that. So she has
clearly
trauma.
the film wants us to believe that she cares about kids.
So much.
Like,
beyond the Call of Duty.
Cut to 5 minutes later. Cut to 5 fucking minutes later, where the police officer tries to stop Rose for whatever reason. She's just being a shitty cop. What's new? And
They get in a car chase.
She breaks through or whatever. She gets in a car wreck. They wreck in on the other side in Silent Hill. Things are spooky. They reunite, and Sharon is gone. The child is gone from the car. Rose is trying to figure out what to do, and the cop comes over and sees the child is not there, handcuffs Rose and says, "I'm taking you back to the station. Looks like we're going to have to walk. It's a long way," or something like that.
I wrecked my bike, so we're going to have to hike 15 miles back to town.
And meanwhile, Rose is shouting, believably, my child
is missing.
My kid is missing.
Something's
We
going
need to
on
find
here."
my kid. And she just ignores her. The cop just ignores her.
I wrote down a specific line that the cop says. She's talking about how like, oh, you city types coming out here, to our country, towns or whatever. But she says specifically, this is verbatim, "You get off the highway from the big city, bring all your sick problems with you." So, like, yeah, people from the city just, like, come out into the boonies in West Virginia to diddle kids or whatever.
Man,
like,
yeah, there are several times where you get characters who...
like, her sick
who
problem
diss
is that her
on
child
like, city
is missing.
people.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's the best they can do for like writing like small town people. Like it's just like that. They just like reinforce the stereotype. It's like small town people hate city people. They get their salsa from New York City. like, and that's all small town people are.
Also,
it's really silly.
Detective Gucci tells...
What a name.
I know, right? It's so good. Detective Gucci tells Sean Bean that he tells him like the story about BDSM cop, going after the kid down the mine shaft or whatever. And it's revealed later that like he helps and like protect the secret of Silent Hill, but BDSM cop who works for his department, who is like presumably close to him, does not know about Silent Hill.
Nope.
No, like she is just like along for the fucking ride, and she is like real fast and loose with her gun, terrible on trigger discipline, so all around like what you would expect from a cop.
Also, like, she's a cop from the town over. She's clearly been there for a while. She has a good relationship with Gucci. Why doesn't she know anything about Silent Hill?
That's my point. Yeah,
exactly. Like, exactly. And just to reiterate, like,
you
what the fuck?
You start to look at any of it too closely, and it's really easy to poke big old
Big old
holes. And...
Yeah, and what a bummer too. That's the thing is like a story can get weird, nebulous, and even convoluted, but as soon as it just starts like dropping like direct exposition, I think that's where it all really like starts to get problematic. Oh, and while we're on the subject of like the direct exposition, it's not just the exposition that is too ham-fisted. It's also the subtext. Let's talk about the fucking religious symbolism in this film.
It's not even subtext at this point. It's just text.
No, it is literally like Sean Beam. There are sequences in the film where he's walking around, he's looking for Rose and Sharon, and if you're like even loosely familiar with like religious symbolisms, you're familiar with like the flowers, Rose of Sharon, and like all that kind of stuff. And
yeah,
like,
or if you've read
Grapes of Wrath,
yeah.
Rose of Sharon, all that kind of stuff. And we just have Sean Beam rocking around on these sets, just shouting, "Rose, Sharon!"
So much of this movie is
Rose!
just Sharon,
like
Sharon. It just made me think of Heavy Rain or whatever. Sean.
Sean! And
I knew you would come and save me.
All I could think during that was just like him walking around just shouting like subtext, subtext, subtext. The film is just screaming subtext at you, and it's like, you're right, it's not subtext anymore. If you're just you feel this need to scream it.
Yeah.
And again, one of my issues is my most familiar interactions with Silent Hill is Silent Hill 2. There's little to no religious iconography or symbolism there. I think Silent Hill like 4 or 3 or 4.
First one
first one
is
is
heavy into
cult-centric,
cult
right?
centric.
Yeah, it gets into the cult
yeah.
stuff. And I think they get back into that in like 3 in The Room and stuff as well. But the cult stuff, even then, like from what I understand, like it's Christianity adjacent, right?
No, not really.
It's pretty direct.
Yeah, and it's one of my less liked things about the series.
Yeah.
Is when they go too convoluted into that stuff, honestly.
Yeah, I feel like the need to like explain Silent Hill is just in general like a downfall. I think it's most effective when it just exists.
Yeah, and you know what? I would say that goes. We were talking about this last night, actually. That goes for a lot of Lovecraftian-esque detective narratives as well, where a big cult at the end being responsible for it is a cop out. Like,
Yeah.
and it feels lazy.
Well, it's overdone at this point.
Yes,
Yeah,
I think
it's
there is,
tropey,
and
yeah.
I think there's still cool ways you can
I
do
love
it.
culty
and,
stuff though.
like-
Like that's some of my favorite shit. But yeah, like
Same.
it's a very easy narrative. It's a convenient.
It's kind of
narrative
tired at
device,
this
yeah.
point.
Yeah, and I
It can,
think
it can be done very well, but
Sure.
but you have to bring something different to it. And the cult in this is really annoying because it is, to use your term, Christianity adjacent, and most of what they're shouting in all of their like big scenes is they're just shouting random shit about sin and just like very generic, like the child is the incarnation of sin. And just like yelling shit from the Book of Revelations.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's shallowly researched and shallowly realized.
Well, okay, so forgive me if this is wrong. It's been a little while since I've watched the making of, but if I remember correctly, like, okay, early on when they're driving to Silent Hill, there's an old church sign that has like a Revelations-esque quote on it and stuff.
Oh,
and
on
then,
the inside of the school when she walks in.
no,
There's
it's
something over
on
door.
on outside on the road. There's a church they pass that says like something about the judgment of angels or whatever, and they shall be judged. It's on a sign. But anyway, like that quote and a lot of the other quotes, like quote from the Bible in the film, are actually just made up for the movie. But regardless of that, it's very shallow, and I think it's almost worse for it.
The problem I have with the cult stuff is I feel like a lot of it is tacked on to the last third.
Yeah.
There
seriously.
are very vague foreshadowings of that, but it really descends into full-on witch-burning cult Jonestown.
Introducing Alice Krieg's
insanity.
character.
And it's
Christabella.
oh god, what a bad name. And
Sorry to
it's-
any Christabellas listening.
Yeah.
I will say,
Christabella, if you're listening, you're a real person, and so you can get away with it.
while
Your name is valid,
I
girl. Keep it up.
thought a lot of the cult stuff was pretty sloppy, I did like Alice Krieg. I did think she gave a pretty fun performance.
Yes, I think her dialogue is terrible, but like her portrayal is great.
She's on record as actually hating this character. She did not enjoy. She was not happy during the production of this movie.
It seems like she was kind of giving a campy performance, which I felt was fitting.
she thought her character was too one-dimensional, so she was boring. That she was too.
It's so true.
That she was too evil without having any redemptive qualities to make her somewhat sympathetic, so that she was just like a bland villain. So I think she was playing her very flat because I don't think she had a lot to work
with, and she didn't. She's so right for that too.
Yeah, and like she's a good actress being forced to play a bad character.
That's interesting because I feel like I almost read her performance as like pushing the camp element a little further
think-
than the other characters did.
Yeah. I guess
I like.
I
when
think
Tease, when
she's
you say
just-
flatness, like you mean one-dimensionalness, which is camp.
Well, you know, a bored actor isn't gonna give a
Cartoony.
particularly campy performance.
I mean-
so I'm kind of surprised to hear that.
I mean, she's, like I said, she's a good actress, so, like, even her worst is still good, I think, you
Yeah.
know? Like, she still pulls it off. I do find that character really obnoxious, though. I don't like that character.
Same.
Which is what makes her undoing so satisfying. Before we get into that, to go back to your point about the subtext, I think an interesting sort of divergence from that I think is bad is you mentioned that in the games, like, the monsters and stuff are representative of, like, specific aspects of, like, the protagonist's personality. So the monsters are, like, personal to those characters. The monsters are basically, like, subtext incarnate in that sense.
Yeah.
But in this movie, pretty much all of the monsters are just ripped straight from the games and given to characters that they were not designed for.
Exhibit
That
A
they
is
don't
Pyramid Head, is the
Right.
Red Pyramid.
And like I said, I haven't played the games, but I think that while the designs of some of the monsters are cool, for me, they've never made a lot of sense in the context of, like, the film and the story. It feels like fan service.
Well, it's
to
fun.
me.
It's
is.
funny because the first monsters we see, the little kid monsters,
Yeah.
I think work well within subtext in that, you know, she's lost her child. She's worried
Yeah.
about her child in particular.
In
and
that
I
sense,
think
I would agree,
I think
yeah.
as well that whole sequence with her being chased by this horde of freakish demon kids is actually pretty effective.
Yes.
I thought that stuff worked pretty well.
I'll agree with you on that scene. It's other stuff like Pyramid Head and the nurses and stuff, like, at the end that just feel like, hey, remember Silent Hill?
Now, here's what I'll say. While their use isn't very good, like, their execution is great. I'm definitely one of the folks who is a little bit perturbed, like, seeing Pyramid Head in a film that doesn't have James in it. You know, like his foil, literally his foil. But also, I do love me some Pyramid Head, and as a fan, I'm happy to be serviced and see some Pyramid Head in it when he looks as good as he does. Because Pyramid Head looks fucking great in this movie. Same with the nurses
The
as well.
execution of pretty much all the monsters, I would say, is pretty successful.
All the live action ones, yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess the CG babies as well, like they hold up all right.
Some shots don't look great, but especially, like, that first one that we see, like, that holds up pretty well.
And the patient demon too. Like when it comes out, like we never get like a tight shot of it. Like we usually just get the legs walking or whatever. Like it's constantly cutting.
Well, as you mentioned earlier in the show, they did hire dancers for all of the
Yes.
monsters, which I think is a clever way to realize these kinds of creatures that have, like, very weird disjointed movement. Apparently the guy who played Pyramid Head, I'm blanking on his name, but I was reading about him earlier, like, he was also the, like, choreographer for the entire movie. So for, like, all of the other monsters, so and he was the janitor too, the barbed wire janitor. I think that's pretty successful. Like,
Yeah, I think the
execution
the
is good.
movement of all of the monsters is really primo.
No, I mean visually, there's still some of my favorite movie monsters
and
ever.
I think the funny thing about Pyramid Head in this movie is the scene with him, like, stabbing through the door really does not work at all for
Oh
me
no! And him reaching
whatsoever.
through after also.
Yeah,
is
and
bad.
reaching through.
yeah.
bad.
That being said, later on when he rips
Yeah, when he rips the chick's skin off, that is a surprisingly effective scene.
It is
takes you
just
by
gratuity for
surprise.
gratuity's sake, but
Yeah.
man, it does work.
takes you by such surprise that you don't expect it whatsoever.
Yeah, it's extremely over the top, which is, I think, what it needs to be. I really liked that. Yeah, I was surprised how much I didn't really enjoy the nurses sequence in this movie, or on this watch specifically, because I used to like it. But when you talk about like the context of those creatures in Silent Hill 2, having to do with James and abandoning his wife who has cancer and sort of like being lecherous over like the nurses in the hospital, like while he's neglecting his dying wife. So to have these monsters be like perversions of that but still like kind of sexy, cool for that character.
But as soon as you remove James, it gets male gazy and weird.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense in the context of this
it's like, why are these nurses sexualized? I don't get it.
because they got some tiggle bitties.
Let's think of this whole sequence, like they appear, she gets scared for a second, they start moving creepily, and then all stab each other in the neck, and they all die.
Well, there's a little more to that. Like we do see the mechanics of how they work, because it's quite cool in the game, and I thought the film like does an all right job of explaining to you that they only move when the light is on them. Because she holds the flashlight out on them, and they all start like slowly walking towards with their bone-breaking walk. And she shuts off the light, and they all stop. And then she turns it on again. So she walks into the middle of them very carefully, trying not to touch them, and she turns on the light at the end, so they all kind of cluster around it, and she can get past.
That doesn't change my point, though.
What is
the purpose of that sequence in the movie? None.
Narratively, it serves none, and it's awful, which is what we're getting into in our point, and I agree with that.
Yeah.
As a theme park ride, I fucking love it. This film is a really great, if you cut out a lot of the exposition, it's a great Silent Hill themed roller coaster ride. Going from set piece to set piece, seeing all the cool spooky monsters is fun, and I like getting on a superhero themed ride and like flying through and pretending I'm Spider-Man or whatever the fuck else, or pretending I'm being chased by Pyramid Head to all these cool visuals. It's fun on a very base level. But once you try and like turn like a narrative perspective to it, or try and see it like as something that encompasses that same atmosphere of Silent Hill, it falls the fuck apart.
I think I would agree with you. Set piece wise, cool. The story sucks.
Yeah.
And I would say the way to make this movie better would be get rid of 80% of the characters and cut the movie down by 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Tight hour 20, get rid of Sean Bean, get rid of Detective Gucci, get rid of Bondage Cop. You know what? Fuck it. Get rid of the cult, too. Get rid of all of them.
Yeah.
Just all of it.
I really wish we had like a sort of transcendent scene like the staircase scene in Silent Hill 2, where things are revealed, but it feels like in a very natural, non-exposition dumpy way.
Organically.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just happens. The things happen before our eyes, and that's all we need. We don't need someone sitting down and saying, this is the story of Sharon, which is literally what they do in the film. Like, it's just like, okay, flashback time.
Oh, well, yeah, Alessa. And that is some of
sorry, not Sharon.
That is some of the messiest shit.
Yes.
Cut the whole thing out.
Absolutely.
Cut it out.
Holy shit,
Absolutely.
man. About how Alessa got burned as a witch, and then a demon came to her, and then somehow gave birth to the good side of her that was 30 years later left on the doorstep of an orphanage for then Sean Bean and his wife to
explain
adopt, to then come back to Silent Hill later. What the fuck?
And it's all like with the framing of like the really, really hackneyed darkness and light bullshit that you hear in every like boring fantasy like narrative ever. It's just like more of the same, like the darkness of Silent Hill, the darkness of Alessa, the dark is coming for our sin, more of that. And it's so tired. I'm so over that.
Look, mommy, I'm burning.
Oh my God. Burning.
Best delivery of the fucking movie.
That soundbite is in the soundtrack, so if you want to throw it in, you can very easily.
I'll throw that in here.
Burning.
Look at me. I'm burning.
See, the thing is, especially with all of the sloppiness. I feel like cutting things down would have helped. And on top of that, I think
Yeah, we don't need the exposition. Just let it be strange and unusual, and let's try and build the narrative on our own through context.
yeah, well, and I think what it still needs is just a more confident hand in directing almost. You know, someone who's not scared of just saying, oh, this is a question left unanswered. It goes back to kind of thing we've been talking about in past episodes where there's a difference between ambiguity and vagueness.
Yeah.
In that, you know, you can leave questions unanswered or ambiguous. You just have to be confident about leaving ambiguity there without being vague. You have to have an answer in your head.
Well, yeah, there's for sure there you have to give the viewer enough material that they can start to like formulate their own ideas. It's the difference between leaving the viewer asking themselves interesting questions or asking themselves frustrating questions.
A lot of the exposition dumps, I feel like additionally are inherent flaws of translating, you know, between video games and films. You know, where video games, especially the Silent Hill video games, you're an active participant and you're finding bits and pieces of exposition in organic objects that you pick up and, you know,
Riddles that you solve.
riddles that you solve.
The riddles
pieces
are so important.
And notes and things like that.
Ambient world building.
That stuff really can't be translated to film in the same way.
No, it becomes a scavenger hunt in the movie. Like, it's just like, go
Exactly.
to next place because she finds a weird thing. And like
and she does that over and over again. And like,
and it's always just like find thing that takes you to place. Whereas in the games, it's like, one of my favorite examples, for a quick aside, is in 2, you come across, in the hotel, you come across like a clock and you try and move it and it won't budge. And you know that like down the hall in that direction, like you need to get that way. So it's like, maybe if I get past the clock or whatever. And you keep wandering on the hotel and you find arrows written on the wall. And it's 3 arrows and it says Henry Mildred Scott next to them. And like you think about it, it's like, oh, okay, what does that mean? It's like, oh, hour, minute, second, Henry Mildred Scott. And it's weird. That's a really unusual puzzle. And sure enough, you go back to the clock and you hour, minute, second, you put the hands on at that point and you can push the clock aside. Who is it for? Who drew that on the wall? Why is that there? Well, it's James exploring his own psychosis. You know, like that's all you need for the explanation. You don't need to have it explained to you that the janitor went in there and wrote it on the wall because the cult did this because of, you know, whatever. Like, who cares? I don't give a shit. I'm here to solve a weird riddle that doesn't make any sense. That's part of the fun of it. And yeah, once you start adding context, you ruin it. Like, it takes the fun away.
Well, and for example, that's something you could absolutely not do in film.
Yeah.
You know, you can't do a riddle like that without it just falling on its face. And you mentioned that it felt like an amusement park ride of Silent Hill. I think a lot of that is where it works the best.
Agreed.
You know,
I still love the nurse scene for that
it
reason.
loses the plot a little bit when it tries to explain stuff and get convoluted, especially in the third act. A lot of the reason like this is, especially by me, considered the best video game movie is because I feel like a lot of Silent Hill the games are wandering around corridors listlessly, not knowing what's going to appear next, and I think that translates really well for a lot of the movie. It's the second half where it loses that element a bit.
yeah.
But overall, I think it does capture a lot of that spirit well.
I don't think it would ever be made, but I think that this is gonna sound stupid, but like an art house director doing
Give me
like
a David
Silent
Lynch
Hill,
Yes.
directing Silent Hill.
I
Oh my
mean,
God, yeah.
who I honestly
Eraserhead
jumped
already
to,
feels like it's set there. Like, just about.
who I jumped to first, and this is gonna sound pretentious, and I know he's dead, but give me a fucking Tarkovsky directed Silent Hill. So much of Tarkovsky's stuff is like wandering around like these strange spaces, like ruminating on deeply philosophical, psychological stuff. And I think that lends itself to Silent Hill really well. I mean, that's a fucking pipe dream, obviously, you know. I think that part of the pitfalls of adapting a video game into film is that you have to make it accessible even for people who haven't played the game. And with so many video games, like, how do you do that?
Well, you have to make it
You know?
accessible to like a much broader audience.
Exactly.
And not even just like people who haven't played the game, because I wonder too, especially since you brought up that originally Sean Bean's character wasn't in the original script.
I think he was at the very
careful.
very beginning.
Yeah, I want to be careful, like, just blaming the director and writers for that as well, because I wouldn't be surprised if there were earlier cuts or scriptings of this film that actually adhered to a lot of, like, the critiques we're giving it and were cut because of boards, were cut because of executives.
Yeah, I could definitely see studio interference. It's funny you mentioned writers, because this was written by Roger Avery, who wrote the original screenplay for Pulp Fiction.
Yes, he wrote the story, quote unquote. He has the stories credit for Pulp Fiction, which is very weird that he wrote this movie, but also, like, I looked up the other shit that he's done, and like Pulp Fiction's like his only good credit. So it's like I know Christoph Gans did have a heavy hand in writing this script too. He just didn't credit himself.
Yeah.
I also saw that the original script was over 200 pages, so
Damn.
yikes.
Damn.
Jesus pleases.
And that was even before the studio was like, there's no men in this movie.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, it was already way too long.
Yeah, well, it's so funny because I follow Roger Avery on Letterboxd. I found that he reviewed the Silent Hill sequel movie, which he had no part in. And he rated it half star with the review. If I could rate this 0 stars, I would.
And I could not agree more. I saw it in theaters, and I had a really, really bad time. Oh my god. I was like a little excited about it because I was thinking like, oh, Silent Hill 2, the movie. Oh shit, it's gonna be about James and my favorite video game ever. Neat. Can't wait to see this film. Didn't watch any of the trailers because I didn't want that spoiled for me, and oh god, was I so mad. Was I so angry. Has
That's why
nothing
you
to do with
watch
Silent Hill 2.
trailers.
Yo, okay, so spoilers for a really bad movie. First off, Malcolm McDowell's cameo could not save that film. I couldn't even begin and wouldn't want to break down the garbage plot of that film, but one of the protagonists in it is the guy who plays Jon Snow in Game of Thrones.
Kit Harington.
Kit Harington, oddly enough. But like they go to Silent Hill, they find out that like there's a new villain that's chasing them down. I don't know who it is. It's like some weird like femme character with like a blade head or something. Oh, neat. And it basically ends with someone like the girl finding out, I want to say that like Pyramid Head is her dad or something awful. I don't remember what it is, but it's really, really
Now
bad.
I want to see
But
it.
no, get this. It
Pyramid
ends.
Head is my dad.
It ends with her summoning Pyramid Head to save them, and Pyramid Head fights the monster that's been hunting them down the whole movie, and there's a shitty monster fight
Nice.
with terrible choreography.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't that film also in 3D?
Yes. Yes,
it
it
was. It's a mess. It is a wretched, terrible film.
y'all-
it's bad.
Do y'all remember? I didn't see the first Silent Hill in theaters. Do y'all remember if that was originally 3D too? Because there were multiple times when I was watching it this time, like, this looks like it was shot for 3D.
I don't remember. 2006 though. That's primo like 3D.
Yeah, I know
don't think
for
it was.
I know for a fact the second one was, but like, man, there's so like all of the times where they like look down into like the fiery hell depths and like they follow like the elevator cable down. It's like in the foreground, or when they like go up over something. It's like everything. A lot of the CG looks like it's supposed to be in like coming right at you. You know?
Yeah, and like Pyramid Head's blade coming through the wall
Right.
and stuff. Like, yeah, you're so right.
And I don't think it was.
It wasn't. The second one
And that's
definitely was.
that's extremely baffling.
That
to
is
me
weird,
because a lot
'cause it
of-
wasn't,
A
yeah.
lot of this movie does look like it was shot for 3D. Weird. Do we want to talk very briefly about the climax and the ending, and then rate this thing?
Yes, I also want to talk about the music
Oh
as
yeah,
well. I
good
feel like
point.
that's very crucial. But let's talk about the climax first. We can,
Yeah.
we can praise the music a little at the end.
Yeah. So Rose goes down into hell or whatever and makes a deal with the demon and comes back to the cult and the church and lets the demon out. And that is one of the what I would say is the cooler sequences, like the burned Alessa like rising up from the pit on like this bed of barbed wire.
Yeah, it's like the church organ, like the Gothic
Yeah.
cathedral organ music starts coming in.
You know, she kills the whole cult with just barbed wire snacks, and those effects don't. look
Yeah,
great,
I will
but
say those did not hold up.
The barbed wire.
The
doesn't look
barbed
incredible.
wire tentacle porn did not hold
Yeah,
up very well.
that's something absolutely worth noting. How weird Alice Krieg's death is, because like they definitely do just like fuck her to death with some barbed wire.
Well, it's like a hentai scene, just
Yeah.
about like it's very.
It feels very 2000s edgy.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it is trying way too hard to be edgy.
But, you know, anyway, kills all the cult, but doesn't kill Rose or Sharon. And they get back in their car and they drive back home. But, oh, what's this? They're in the fog the whole time. And they go into the house and it's still foggy. And then we cut to Sean Bean in the house, but it's sunny. So they're still, even though they're back at the house, they're still trapped in purgatory or whatever.
So that means all the convoluted plot was for nothing. None of
Yeah.
it meant anything, really. And they're trying for like a poltergeist kind of thing, you know, I think, where it's like they're right next to each other, but there's, you know, like a dimension, they're a dimension away. and-
Apart, yeah.
or whatever, and doesn't
Like
does
Sean,
not
like
work
Sean
for
Bean,
me.
like feels their presence or something.
He smells
like
their perfume
that.
at one
Yeah.
point, and
Yeah.
it's like they're going for like a poltergeist sort of thing, and it doesn't work.
It's a hokey, like I would say, faux bleak ending. Like it would be bleak if I actually cared about any of these people, but you know, it is what it is. But yes, now let's talk about something that we can certainly be unanimously positive on. By far, the film's shining aspect is its score, because all of the music is straight from the Silent Hill games.
Yeah, and it's all excellent. You know, it's all just Akira Yamaoka and his great, very industrial, very
Industrial ambience.
esoteric, you know, music cues.
Texture.
You know, it goes from weird, you know, guitar-centric stuff to piano stuff to very Eraserhead-esque.
I will.
He just
noise.
understands how to make like those like off feeling sounds. Like one of my favorite examples of it too is like, to once again go back to Silent Hill 2, the theme music for that game is almost like this like proggy indie track. But again, there's just something about it that feels just wrong, and it should be almost be like an upbeat track, and it feels like it would belong in like a 90s TV show or something. And it's cool. It's really neat. But he's so good at making you just feel like your equilibrium is ajar, you know, or is your equilibrium is just off and you're floating and you're alone and left in the dark.
We when Cleve and I were teenagers and making films and stuff in our spare time, we did use a lot of tracks from the Silent Hill movie score.
A lot. Yeah,
A
we
lot.
ripped a lot.
I mean, it's good shit. I was really like kind of struck this time by like how almost jarring the quality difference is between like the music and
The footage.
the film.
Yeah.
Like there were multiple scenes where I'm like, I could not care about what the fuck is happening in this scene at all, and then a music cue will kick in and I'm like, this elevates everything so remarkably. Like it's almost like the film doesn't deserve how good the music is.
I fully agree, and that's why Akira Yamaoka, I think, deserves so much credit for the praise over the atmosphere of these games.
Yeah.
Because so much of it is responsible for that, considering like the PS1, PS2 era graphics. Like you're left with so much to your imagination, and the music fills in every one of those gaps perfectly, just pristinely. And no, so much of my memories of those games and like what I look at so fondly isn't the thrills and chills. It's me wandering around the streets trying to figure out where to go next, wondering what's gonna, what building, what monster am I gonna see next? What am I gonna have to encounter through this fog? What next piece of information am I going to learn? Constantly being reminded that I'm alone, that I have nothing else. As I jot down my little map, as I take my notes, trying to understand what I'm looking at, what is in this world, because no one else is going to do it for me. It's just me in this place. And you get those cues with the do 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 do, and it's so soft and it's so quiet and empty, and to be put on contrast with those industrial sounds and that dragging metal and those reminders, of like this like something horrifying being under the surface. It's all thanks to the music, man. Like, what an incredible score. I love it. I love the shit out of it. I could go on and on.
Well, now that you've talked about what works about the game so well for you, why don't you rate the movie?
3.
Cool. Ben?
I'm going to give it a 3.5. I actually really enjoyed it. Obviously it has its story flaws, but aesthetically, I think it's really well done. The production design is pretty solid. While the CG is a little dated, I think it captures the spirit of the games perfectly. And I think it's paired by fantastic music, which, like you said, really elevates that aesthetic to another level. Yeah, I think it definitely has problems, much like the games do. But I think overall it's the best video game movie out there.
Yeah, you're right. Like I mean, visually it's a 4.5 if and would be a 5 if it wasn't for some bad CG. Like I love some of those shots, but yeah, man, the plot is so bad.
Yeah, if anybody can hear the fireworks in the background, we're filming this on the 4th of July, so happy America Day, I guess. Wear a mask when you go outside. I will definitely still agree that I think this is the best film adaptation of a video game, at least that I have seen. That's an extremely low bar, but this is no Alone in the Dark, that's for sure, or Blood Rain. But like, man, this film has not aged super well with me. While I like a lot of the production design and the music has more character than any of the actual characters in this movie, God, it's a fucking slog to get through. I was really bored for a lot of this viewing. I'm gonna give it a 2.5 out of 5. But that'll mean it gets an average of 3 out of 5 pods. So let us know, what is your favorite film adaptation of a video game? How do you feel about Silent Hill? You can get in touch with us on Twitter or whatever. Next week, it's Ben's choice.
Yes.
And we're going to be talking about a movie that I'm very excited to have a chance to rewatch, Don't Breathe, from 2016?
Something like that.
2016, 2017?
If I believe correctly, it was on my top 5 favorite horror movies of the decade.
Yeah.
Wow.
So Cleveland has never seen it.
Nope.
So that's going to be exciting. I will say I'm looking much more forward to it than I would a rewatch of Silent Hill. But I don't think we need to do a sponsor this week, since we were sponsored by Dead by Daylight at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah, no, we're fine. I'm hungry. I'm ready to eat dinner.
Yeah, we'll
and play some Dead by Daylight.
we'll go ahead and wrap this up. If you like the show, then leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Share us with your friends. Spread the good spooky word. You can follow us on Twitter at PodPeoplePod and engage with us there, or check out our Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/PodPeoplePod, where you'll find a list of all the films we've talked about on the show with our average ratings and links to those episodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Deep State Ozzy.
I'm on Twitter at Mr. Sheep.
I am occasionally tweeting for Light Arc Studio as we further progress on It Stares Back, making our way towards our next big content release. It's taken us a little while, but man, it's going to be good when it comes out, I promise. Well, I mean, maybe. I'll leave it to you, but I think it's going to be good. Anyway, you can also find my work on ArtStation. And on top of that, too, I'm going to throw a little shout out towards the folks over at Dread Central and the Dread Collection video games as well. I just recently did the key art, the cover art for the Dread Collection 2. Go check it out. Check out some fun indie compilation games. You can play
Horror games?
Yes, if you like horror and you like horror indie games, there's a nice selection there. There's some fun games to play. Pretty hype to be a part of that as well. Yeah, so shout out to the folks over at Dread Central and the Dread Collection in general, and all the awesome devs working on those fun projects. And I think that's it for me. Oh, well, no. If you want some spooky art of your own, you can also contact me via my art station under Cleveland Mosier, and maybe get a piece commissioned yourself as well. Commissions are generally open, so feel free to contact me, and we'll do some spooky art together. That's all.
All right. Well, that'll do it for us. So until next time, I got nothing.
Don't go to Silent Hill.
Don't do it.
Bye.